Welcome to the conversation where we unpack the wild, interconnected chaos shaping our world, including the population's decline and all the reasons for it. Today, we're speaking with Dr. Robert V. Hurst, a Harvard trained orthodontist with 50 years of observation under his belt. He discovered the traditional birth order theory only tells part of the story. His groundbreaking concept of double birth order, detailed in his book, Life's Fingerprint, unlocks the secrets hidden in the spacing between siblings, revealing your hidden strengths, your relationship patterns, and even your path to life. Dr. Hurst, thank you for joining us today. We're patching things together, and so he is calling to us via phone, but you can see him nonetheless.
Yes, it's the technology age, and we can work through it. Thank you for having me on your show.
Love it. Love it. So I am really glad to have you on the show because there's a couple of things that I've realized that this explains so much about Crocky, and it helps me analyze him a little bit, that it explains what's really wrong with him is, I finally found you're a
I'm
number
number two
two. You're
child.
a number
I'm a
two,
number
Ethan.
two. So we figured that's probably
Yes,
the fallback for
he
everything.
is a number two. However, however, you are also a functional number two.
Oh, great. Ah.
What happened is 10 years ago, when one of your siblings died, you moved up from number 7 to number 6, which is a second order number 2. So is that the time when you and Ethan started doing stuff together 10 years ago?
It's a good question. No, probably longer than that, maybe 20, 25 years ago.
The 3 is the sensitive birth order. It's laughing on the outside, crying on the inside. You don't want to show others how you really feel.
Now let's
You
break this down.
really,
Give us a
yes,
little sense, Dr. Hurst, because we want to dive into this deep, but give us a little sense of where you are in birth order as far as your family, kind of where you grew up, little dynamics of your family, just to give us a little background.
well, mine was much simpler than yours because I only had one other sibling. I had an older sister. So I am also a number 2, like the two of
Yes.
you. We're all the same. And my parents were both school teachers. And I grew up in the Midwest in Indiana. But now I'm, of course, living down in Louisiana.
Oh,
Uh, and
nice.
uh, and I'm an orthodontist. And how I got interested in this is that I needed to get the cooperation of teenagers. As an orthodontist, you need their help. And so I had to figure out a way to assess a teenager very quickly to find out what I should expect in the way of cooperation. And that's when I got involved in birth order theory. Now, it's really way too simple. People tend to think of it as either an only child, or you're the oldest, or the middle, or the youngest, but that's not how it is at all. There is such a thing as an only child. We understand that. But there is the firstborn, and that's what happens to the only child when they get another kid in the family. Like Ethan is number 2, but his, I guess it was a
Yes.
sister that was number 1.
Yes.
But she started as an only child, and then she becomes a number 1 when Ethan was born. So Ethan is
You
number
wrecked it,
2.
Ethan. It's
I
your
felt
fault.
that. I
This is
felt
all
that
your
as well.
fault.
Yes, that makes sense.
And
Yeah.
then there's number 3, that's you. And then there's a number 4, that's the true baby in the family. So those are the traditional birth orders. Now, if you get families bigger than 4, everything repeats again. Like number 5 is like a number 1. Number 6 is like a number 2. Is like 3. It's the same color, but it doesn't have the same intensity. So you have the same personality characteristics, but not quite as strong.
I feel like we're
So
driving through a fast food lane making an order right now. Like I'll take a number 2 with a side of fries and a number
yeah,
5 with a. I wanna jump in deep here because I know you're gonna break us down on some of those. But before we get there, some of these like maybe we start this theory kind of was from Alfred Alder, right? Who kind of put together the idea of birth order. Is that kind
right.
of where you? I mean, can you tell us a little about Alder and sort of the family
Yes.
constellation to give us a little background before we dive in?
In fact, they were in the same psychoanalytical society, and they had a different way of looking at things. Freud said you were really your personality and things were based on your parents, and Adler said, "No, I don't think so. I think it's based on your interactions with your siblings." And it turned out, of course, that Adler was a number two, and Freud was the number one in his father's family.
He
And it
didn't
was
want to
just a
take
matter
any
of
order.
time. It was a matter of time before they had a falling out. And when they did, they never spoke to each other again. That was it. So they had a whole different way of looking at kids. And as they went on, he came to the United States, and in the 30s and things, it was his thought about the family constellation, which is really the interaction of the children with each other that creates their personalities. And you, coming from a very large family, should really have a feel for all the different personality characteristics of the different ones in the family.
Yeah, we used to joke there's like two families, there's the older and the younger group, and I was the baby of the older and the oldest of the younger group, but we never thought about it in concepts because there were so many. However, it would be hard. I did think, like, being an only child, you have so many disadvantages because when you have lots of kids, you have so many people you can blame things on, and I was definitely a trouble kid. So I mean, I would frame so many siblings on so many different different things.
Well, you're absolutely right. You, as a type of a number three, let's just go to the basic ones: one, two, three. Number one wants to tell people what to do. Number two doesn't want to be told what
Oh.
to do.
Ethan.
And number three is the instigator. They see what those two are up to, and they promote the angst between them. And then they say, "Hey, it wasn't me. I had nothing to do with it. That's you."
It wasn't me. I didn't have anything.
So Dr. Hurst, is that like
I can't believe that.
when I
Uh,
oh,
but
sorry.
that's kind of how it works, and it transcends family after family after family. I mean, I can explain what your siblings were like, and you'll say, "How do you know that? You never met them." I know their birth orders. That's who they are.
Hey,
Like I realize in my boys especially, I tend to think that each of them has one of my worst character traits, but they're just dividing up those character types. Is that what you're saying?
Oh,
Ethan has
Yeah.
about 25 children. He's working on 26. What do you have?
well,
Five kids
Five
now?
kids.
5 kids, three
Yes,
mothers?
3 mums. Yes.
Yeah. No, I think three live together
Yeah, yeah.
and the other two alone.
4 boys are in the States.
this is interesting, and he'll understand this. He has three of these kids in one house, and he has at least two of these kids in another house. If these kids come to visit each other, their birth orders are going to change based on their ages.
Okay.
Oh, wow.
All the children that move up in age over the others are going to adapt beautifully. All the children who get demoted are not going to interact in that new combined family very well at all.
Yeah, they're getting older now, those boys anyway. They're almost men. So yeah.
So he's not worried about
Yeah,
them thinking.
they can fend for themselves now.
Well,
So tell us a little bit about, I mean, why is it so important? Or, I mean, there's this birthright. I know it's called some other terms, but just to give it a name, the birthright. The oldest one has this birthright. And it's fair to say the oldest, gets a lot of attention when they're the only one born. But what is it other than that really is this birthright that we as twos, threes, fours, five, six, seven, down to 13 in my case. Why is it we're all trying to shove around and play, almost the corporate game to get to number one?
you're trying to get the family resources. Where this birthright came from, it kind of came out of the kings of England. The oldest, the firstborn boy, was going to get the kingdom. And the boy that came after that, he had to go find his way somewhere else. And of course, that's why sometimes he came back and murdered his older brother, took over the
Thought
kingdom.
about it.
So number one always has to be on guard. and they're always trying to defend the throne. We gotta use that term.
I think that's how Australia got started.
Yeah, sometimes they get dethroned. And when they get dethroned, they just drop out of life. In other words, number one's supposed to be better in school, and number two is usually the better athlete. But if number one slips in school, number two becomes a straight A student and knocks the number one off the throne. I see Ethan laughing. It might have happened in his case. Did Ethan dethrone his older siblings?
No,
I think he wants to say what he would like to take the claim that
you
he
said
is the
something
athlete of the
about taking out the older sibling or something.
So, well, he's number two, so he should. But who was the student? Was his older sibling the student?
Yeah, my older sibling grew up very fast.
I think
Well, the firstborn has an edge in school because they're older. But let me give you another little bit of information. Only children are all different, and why are they different? They're different because they're the blend of their parents' birth orders.
Oh.
So every only child has a different flavor based on their parents' birth orders. That's the only one that works like that. The other ones, it's all related to their brothers and sisters.
So I mean, if a number two marries a number three, they end up having a 2-3 child as a number one.
Characteristics of both parents, some a little of the two and some a little of the three. And the way we can predict that is if you told me that this was an only child and it had a number two and a number three parent, I would guarantee that only child will either marry a number two or a number three. It happens every time.
Wow.
Even though they're an only child. Your best friend is your same birth order. And in your case, both you guys, well, you're a functional number two now. And Ethan is a number two.
After years of recovery, I'm now a functioning number two. Was I a non-functioning number two prior, or just
a dormant?
When you were number three, I think you were searching for your purpose in life. You were going to save the world in some way, and you went about it, lots of different times. But now, when you're functioning number two, it's like, don't tell me what to do. So you get along pretty good with Ethan.
I don't know. I'm not listening to you, Doctor. I zoned you out as soon as you.
We're too liberated.
Yeah, we're too liberated to be told what to do.
Talked about the traditional birth orders, and when I used them in my office, it didn't work. It only worked about a third of the time, and I was about to throw away the whole theory. And I'm like, this doesn't work. This is not helping me. Then I looked at all my patients and their families, because I was treating multiple kids from same families.
And when you say traditional birth order, you're talking about really limiting it to the 1, 2, 3, and the 4 characteristics of a.
Exactly. And then when I looked at these families, I found that they had brothers and sisters that were spaced 4 or more years apart. 2/3 of my patients had brothers or sisters spaced 4 or more years apart. I guess those are the ones that could afford orthodontic treatment. They space their kids apart. And that's when I came up with the term double birth orders. These kids had both the only characteristics as well as their characteristic of their number, because they were raised like an only child at home while the other child was away at school. So they got all this self-confidence that an only child had, and they become much stronger kids. Very, very different.
Now, I've got to ask, just because it's in relation, but is there a number of which didn't need braces?
I didn't get that.
Is there a number? Because I would say I'm one of 13, and I'm the only one that doesn't wear glasses or ever wear braces. Gotcha. So then back to this order, you really realize there are 4 birth orders, but there's another layer as soon as there's a 5th, a 6th, a 7th child. And what is unique about this second layer? This double birth order that happens. So if you're number 5, you become the first child because you have this 4-year space.
Well, if there's a 4-year space between siblings, that number 5 gets the characteristics of an only as well. So that 5 becomes a 5 only. But there has to be 4 years apart above and below them to get the double birth order.
And why does that 4 years? Why is it so important? I mean, what's unique about this 4 years?
Child parent getting the nurturing that an only child would get. And that's what gives them all these other characteristics. So they become much stronger in all the characteristics.
And by
So if a number 2 doesn't want to be told what to do, a 2 only is an immovable object.
this is why we can't get Ethan to come here. Say that's exactly why he won't move. It's like get off the couch.
Everything I need
But
in
if
my
we go
room.
back within those birth orders, you said they get the nurturing. So a number 5 would grow up as an only child almost because they're getting this nurturing. And before you'd mentioned the family resources. When we talk about the family resources, what's involved in the family resources? Are those really the parents' attention? Is that the heart of what it is, or is there more to what we mean by family resources?
The resources, no. First of all, it is the attention. But the kids, when you get 13 kids, the parents are pretty much divided 13 ways. But the resources would be who's the one who gets the car when they get into high school, who's going to get braces on their teeth, who's going to get the actual material things. Those are the resources. Who's going to get the college education? The family only has so much, and usually the resources go to number 1, and then they dribble down from there on down.
So it's really not just attention; it is actual resources. It's kind of the birthright.
Yeah, I imagined even siblings
You have to
fighting
be
over
double
toys,
birthright.
like.
There has to be a 4-year gap with that child on either side. So a number 5 that comes in after number 4 2 years later is just like another number 1, only not quite as strong. It's not a double birth order. It's a single birth order. It just starts all over again.
I see. So then, I mean, I'm thinking in my family, it was so big that we ended up creating almost a sovereign nation. And what I mean by that is eventually our parents worked all the time. We were kind of the labor force. My father was a contractor and my mother was a janitor. So we helped them do all that. But you came to like my oldest siblings were the enforcers and the lawmakers. So my oldest sister, she's the number 2. We used to call her the wicked stepmother, even though she was just the sister, but she was very strict. And then my 2 brothers would be like her enforcing army. It's almost like Animal Farm, the book. I've been tied up to a van. I was tied up to a horse trailer, a post. I mean, there were lots of ways that they would enforce.
But that was for your own good.
But this, you can see. Yeah, I know it was Ethan says it was for my own good. I needed it. I had it coming. I probably did have it coming. But inside of those dynamics, how does that fit as far as the family goes with spacing and all being in one place? Like if you have 3 number 1s, how do they sort of compete? Because even though there is a 4-year gap, we're all kind of in the same environment for a time at least.
When you're talking about a 4-year gap, you might talk about between number 1 and number 4 or number 3. In other words, between the siblings, there might be just a year or 2. And in your case, in your family with the 13, that's what it was. So you end up with a number 1, then the number 5 is like the number 1. So number 1 and number 5 would be very similar, and they would be friends. In the number 2 and number 6 would be friends because they were similar, and number 3 and number 7 would be friends in the family. And of course, you can go to the 3rd level too when you pass number 8. See, number 8 is the baby in the 2nd family, and number 4 is the baby in the 1st family. But your family was a little different because you had one child was deceased almost at birth. And so what happens is because that child really was not part of the group, you can't count that one in your number. So the numbers skip. So your number 5 birth was really number 4. And that's how it works when you have a deceased one in the family. And then as you get older, and this is what happened to you, 10 years ago, one of your older siblings died. And that's what changed your functional birth order, because you had to move up a notch to take the place of that, as everybody moves up, that's below the one that
Don't get
died.
any ideas now, Ethan.
It's a family constellation. It is alive. And it's the interaction between these kids. You see, sometimes if you have a handicapped child in the family, that changes it too, because it's just not your number. There's about 7 things we have to look at to find your real birth order. And one was, of course, any siblings older than you that died when you were growing up, but also, was there any handicapped siblings? Were there any twins in the family? Twins put a lot of pressure on a family. So, there's some things you have to look at. And in the book, it explains how to find your true birth order. And for some people, it's a little more difficult than others.
So, like, what happens, like, in cases of divorce or broken family, or when, kids decide to leave or move, not die?
Well, it's a great question, because it really impacts a lot of people. But you've asked me a couple questions. One, if death's in the family, everybody below that person that died moves up in birth order and takes a different role in the family. Okay, and an example was Vincent van Gogh, the painter who cut off his ear, and well, he had a brother that was 1 year older than him who died, and the parents never let that death be a real death. They continued to celebrate his birthday even though he had died. So Vincent van Gogh was the second child, but he could never take his role because his older brother, who also was named Vincent van Gogh, was perfect in every way. And because he had a birthday every year, he was a year older than Vincent. So it kind of drove Vincent a little loony. So that's one thing about a death in the family. You don't want to keep that child alive because, it's the most perfect child. But the other question was, what happens when you have divorces and remarriage? When the children live together, the Brady Bunch, they move in together. Every child that moves up in birth order based on their age gets a new birth order, and they adjust beautifully. Every child that gets demoted in birth order because somebody else in that family is older than them, they don't get along in that new family at all. And it's perfectly predictable. Before you bring them together, you know exactly what's going to happen. I hope that answered your question.
Nice. I mean, it does make for a strange dynamic. So if you have, families that are, there is a death, there can be there's a rearranging where one possibly could work up the ranks, you might say. And then if they get divorced or get remarried, it depends on the family dynamic, but they all take on a new place to kind of fit in there. When they do get married, does that 4-year gap then still apply based on where they are in the new birth order?
A patient of mine, I was treating two different families, and the mother of this one little girl who was an only child decided to marry. The father was divorced, and he had 2 girls in his family, and so she was looking forward to having a new dad, and then she'd have some older sisters. She thought that was going to be great, and she was a great patient. And then they got married. And within 6 months, the little girl said she didn't like this at all, and she acted out. She wasn't a good patient anymore because she had her own room before. Now she had to share a room with 2 older sisters. So she went from a birth order of an only child to a number 3. She didn't like it at all. And within 6 months, they were divorced, and she was back home with her own room. So that's the dynamics of how birth order works.
So are you trying to imply that number 3s are also manipulative?
didn't like being a number 3. She liked being an only.
And number 1. Right. I see. So she used her number 3 new skill set to get back to her number 1 status.
Because they're like little adults. You remember the movie Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory?
Right.
Every one of those kids were only children. And Charlie was like a little adult. He was very responsible. But the other only children were pretty irresponsible and pretty demanding, if you remember the movie.
Right. I mean,
different flavors. Pardon the pun on.
How far? How long do we keep our family status with us? So let's say, I mean, you said I'd had a birth in my family, so I'd adjusted from a number 7 to a number 2, but when I'm not with my family, I'm away. I live in Texas. They all live all over the country and the world in some regards. Does it really only apply when we get back together, or is this something I've taken with me? I now take with me in life, and so I'm a rebranded number 2 everywhere.
When you get together, you have to play a different role, but otherwise you're really that number 3. That number 7, which is number 3. The way it all works out is when the family gets together at Thanksgiving and everybody's in the same house having dinner or Christmas, you revert back to the exact position you were as a kid. Even though you might be very successful, now you're still the baby in the family. You have to sit at the little kids' table, which you probably did, probably made a mess.
I still do. My mother still makes me sit at the little kids' table. I just have much bigger legs now, so I've got a
family. You take on a little different role in the family because you moved up one notch. But you're basically a 7 or a 3 at heart. The troublemaker. We know that.
Is it possible? Is it possible, Dr. Hurst, to say if I was living with my mum one week and then my dad the next week, is it possible I could be like a 1 in one family and a 3 in the other family, and then how does that work? Sorry.
That hate going to the other house because they get demoted. When they get demoted, visiting, 1 week on one house, 1 week the other, they hate that house because they started as a number 2 and now they're at a number 4. They don't like that. Okay. But the one that went from a number 4 and moves up to a number 2, they would love going to that house. That when it's just the same thing. You move up, you like it. No one likes to be demoted. That's how it works.
So,
are there no happy number 4s? It seems like a quite depressive. No wonder I'm creating so much trouble.
That's why they're called crybabies.
Number 4 is the happiest kid. Number 4 is the baby in the family, and everybody takes care of the baby. The problem is the baby gets ignored, so the baby has to be loud, and sometimes he hits his siblings to get their attention. And he's the comedian usually in the family.
Now, I noticed you don't like to use the word middle child. Is that just because the number order, or is it touching another theory that might contrast?
Well, people that make it too simple, the oldest, the middle, the youngest, and because if you have 4 kids, do you have 2 middles? No. Everybody has their number 1, 2, 3, 4. So if you have 2 kids, you don't have a middle child, you have a number 2.
And then what plays into it? How does sex play into this? And by that, I don't mean, conception, more about, if the oldest is a girl and then the second oldest is a boy, what kind of dynamic does that now create on the family versus, maybe having 2 girls and a boy, or maybe having all girls? What does that play into it?
Born in the South and you were number 2 and your name was Hunter, you have an edge on dethroning your older sister. To give you an example, Hillary Clinton is a number 1 and she had 2 younger brothers, but she was tough and she fought off any dethroning. But usually number 2 boy can dethrone his older sister. It's without any trouble at all.
I see Ethan nodding. He's like, damn
if we want.
So Ethan, the problem now, Ethan, is that you're going to have to function like a number
Yeah, I
one,
don't want to.
but you don't want to do that. You're going to have to start telling people what to do.
Yeah, I think that's too much responsibility. Ethan's already trying to back out of this. Like, wait a minute, I'd rather go for the 4.
No, I know my options.
You can't. There's no room for it. You can't go down that low. You're number 2. But in birth orders, the number 2 gets along pretty well with number 4 because number 2 doesn't want to be told what to do, and number 4 just ignores them.
That sounds right.
3s or number 7 as you are. The reason that they're so good on interpersonal relationships is that when they were born, they had, as a minimum, to understand 14 different relationships. And in your case, because you're a second level, there were 28 different relationships you had to understand when you were born between all your siblings and each one with your dad and your mom. And that's what makes you so unique.
I'm destined to fail in this regard, is what
Have you
it's
seen A Beautiful Mind? And everywhere he looks, everywhere is like a geometric map.
right. The Edgar household. I mean, that's really the question I was going to ask: is what kind of time frame is it? Is it important that you were, as young as a certain age when you all started living together, or if you all started to living together as teens? Is it just your family reassimilates and then you find a new order and a new place and a new ecosystem or constellation, as Alder said?
16. In other words, if you're together until about age 16, but then, if you get a Brady Bunch family and you have to mix them together, they have to adjust, and you adjust, but you may never really be happy because of your adjustment. In other words, you were a 2 and now you're a 3, or now you were a 1 and now you're a 2. You're functioning that way, but you're never happy because you got demoted. The ones that are happy are anyone that moved up. Everyone wants to move up a notch, but not move down.
Gotcha. So, I mean, as you mentioned happiness, and you alluded to in your book that, and you gave some examples of how this can help predict your love life. What are some recommendations that you've seen? You already gave us an example of one, or I think it's 1s and 3s do not go together. What are some examples of your birth order and who you would, most predict that certain birth orders would match other birth orders? And you even use this for, business. And you said in business, partners might want to work together based on their birth order.
Right. One is if you find someone that is the same birth order as you. That's the first kind. Because why is that? Well, you see life exactly the same way. You finish each other's sentences and whatever. The problem with that is that there can only be one image in the mirror at a time. So if you're both number 1s, somebody has to stand aside so that, there's only one image in that mirror. So if you're both trying to get there at the same time, there's a conflict. The other type of love at first sight, if you find someone with the same birth order as somebody that you grew up with, especially if it's the gender that you're looking for. For instance, you being a number 7, and if you had a sister that was a number 1, a sister that was a number 2, a sister that was a number 3, any one of those birth orders would be a perfect match for you because you understood them growing up. And in your case, with 13 kids in the family, you match with so many different people. You match with a 1, with a 2, and you match with you match with a 7, and you match with the number 10.
He's binumeral.
Those are all the girls in your family.
Ethan says I'm binumeral. Yes. I'm on the spectrum. I'll take any kind of number. I define in my family.
Joe just wants friends. Why can't we get
Yeah, I
along?
just want. That's basically it's just loneliness. I need a friend, is what you've been saying. But we used to eat. There'd be 13 kids around the table, and I ran into a guy this last summer at a wedding, and he's like, "Oh, I remember eating at your house." He's like, I sat down, I scooted my chair, and I looked up, and boom, the food's gone. And I do eat very fast, and I have noticed that my siblings at the top are slower eaters, and the lower down you go, the faster eater you are. And so I didn't know. Have you come across this at all, as far as your maybe orthodontist work, or
Yeah, there's a crossover
as far
there's
as
a
how
crossover
fast?
into eating
It's
dysfunction.
a smaller sibling and they're fighting for the food. You're absolutely right. That's how it works. A big family, by the time the plate gets to you, there's only one potato left on it.
So there's some data out recently. We just got the latest census data, and for the first time in our history, women who were ages 40 to 44 have a higher propensity to have a baby than teens, 19 and under. So for the first time, that group had more children than teens. And I think it's fair to say that a lot of these women, we're seeing delayed household formation. It's one of the reasons Ethan and I brought together the show, is really talk about population decline. And so we're going to see more and more, ones and maybe twos, two onlys, one only or two only family households. What does that say about? I mean, so maybe we spend a little time talking about the ones and the ones and two family households. And what does it mean for a lot of our seniors retiring? Are these people going to take care of their parents? What does it mean as far as the dynamics of them wanting to, save or have a propensity to save? What does it mean for managers and job functions? Can you give us a little flavor of that? Of what is the society change as far as having more ones and twos only in the society?
Because I'm going to take it nationwide. Do you realize that the country of China, has more only children than any other country? They eliminated families.
Yeah, the
Because
1979 policy, one
that's
child,
right.
right?
These only children have to take care of two parents. And that's why they had big families. They were hoping that one of those 9 kids would be successful and take care of the parents in their old age, because there was no Social Security, there was no pension plans. You had to have big families. But when you only have one child, then that child basically is the only child, and they have to take care of two parents when they get older. And it's a real demographic. I just saw in the news where our president is offering a bonus for families now if this goes through to have more children.
They're trying to offer 5,000. And China has done this, Russia has done this, Japan has done this,
Australia has
all with failed attempts. No one's
Australia did it. My first two boys, I got
uh,
paid.
Australia's done it, and Ethan has
I
taken
got
advantage
paid.
of
My
every.
first two boys were paid by the government, paid for by the government.
Change the dynamics of families, because uh, there's a big burden on that only child to take care of two parents. Both emotionally and economically as they get older.
Which of the two children would typically tend to be more parent centric as far as feeling a responsibility for taking care of their parents?
Uh, I think it depends on the birth order of the parent. You see, if the parent was a number 3, the number 3 child would feel the closest to that parent. If the parent was a number 1, the number 1 child would feel closest to the parent, or the parent to that child. But that doesn't mean they have the characteristics to be fair with the other children in the family. Uh, it really depends uniquely on how balanced that person is. Sometimes it's the number 2 that would be able to manage things better for the family. But I think a lot has to depend on the birth order of the actual parent that needs the help.
A number one in general, as you have mentioned, a number one traditionally is trying to, and this is a one only. A one only is trying to please the parents, correct?
Well, yes, the first child will take on the feelings of the parents toward things. In other words, they're the enforcer of the parents' rules over the other children. So that's why they become the enforcer, because these are the rules in the family. They're going to follow the rules. The firstborn is very hard on themselves because they feel they can't make any mistakes. There's a lot of pressure on them. So they're their own worst enemy.
Ethan and I are
Because they
just
try to
laughing
be
at
so
all of
perfect.
our older
Yeah,
siblings.
I'm laughing at my kids too. My oldest son always struggles when his younger brother beats him at anything. Yeah.
Counsel people and say, look, if you have two boys in the family, don't let them play the same sports. Let them excel in individual sports. But if you do the same sport, now they're competitive against each other, and there's enough competition between the two anyway. So don't push it.
And you did mention older siblings are often not normally maybe pushing and competitive in athletics, where you said as they get younger, they tend to go into sports. Is that just because the number one is not as competitive because they've been, an only child?
They have the birthright, and they're getting everything. So they don't need to compete. They're competing in school, and they've got their edge in school, and that's what they're working on. And number two, they've got to find a niche for themselves. It gets bad for number two if number one is also an athlete. So number two has nothing to make them special. So number two can be squished by number one. And that's what number one would love to do if they have a chance. So look out if someone number one is also the athlete and the student.
I'm not worried. I'm not scared.
That's the dynamics that goes
I'm
on.
not too afraid of my number one.
That normal that you'll see number one and number two somewhat close in a 3 and a 4, and the gap. My oldest has about a 5-year gap above her younger brother, so that would make her actually a one only, and her younger brother would be a number one, and then a number two and a 3.
Okay, that child is a one only birth order, and then the next child, the one that's 5 years younger. Number 3 is like 2 years younger than number 2, and then number 4 is another 2 years younger.
Correct. Yep.
Okay. This is another type of double birth order because you have two separate families. The first child is a one only, is the family by itself. Your second child is the oldest in the second family. So that child is a 1, but also a 2. So that has a double birth order of a 1, 2.
Does that mean I can get them different Christmas gifts? Can I say
Princess Di was the third child, like you, the third. But she had 2 older sisters that were 4 or 5 years older than her. And then she had a brother 2 years younger, Spencer. So Princess Di's older sisters were a 1 and a 2. Princess Di was the third, but also the oldest in the second family. So she was a 1, 3. And she had 2 distinct personalities. The one, she wanted to be in charge in the royal family. She was fighting her way. And as a 3, she was interested in saving the people who had landmines. And, she was a kindergarten teacher. And then her brother was a 2, 4. And if you remember, after she died, he was very vocal about he felt that the royal family was the cause of her death and whatever. So that's another type of double birth order. And they're really about 17 different birth orders. So it's not so simple. And that's why you got to get the book.
Is there ever a time in a family dynamic where you are fulfilling a different birth order? Say there's 5 children, and you have number 3. You did mention there might be a handicap or something that comes in the family, and it changes a bit of your birth order. Like, what are some ways that your birth order might change, and the dynamics of the family that go into assigning birth order? So in other words, your actual birth order may not be what your birth order is psychologically.
Right. Not your number of birth. Well, I'll give you an example. Let's say we have a young lady that's born she's only child, and then she gets a brother that's born, and now she's a number 1, and the brother's number 2. But the brother has a congenital heart condition, and he's epileptic. And so he starts to take a lot of the family resources because of his medical condition. And number one expected all these resources from the family and attention, and all of it's going to her younger brother. But she can't say anything about it because he's got a medical condition. So she grows up extremely upset and never can recover for the damage of her dethroning, that she was dethroned without doing anything. It was just the fact that her brother had these handicaps and all the family attention. So that's what can happen in a family, and that's the dynamics that you have to look at. Uh, a similar thing can happen if the second birth is a birth of twins. Well, it's always about the twins. It's always about the twins. And the oldest child gets ignored because all the resources go to the twins all the time. So you have to look at, these factors that go into finding your real birth order and how it affects them.
Interesting. And twins, I mean, I imagine that's faced with lots of families. They could have twins that are identical. They could have twins that are off. And then we now have, it's very common to have triplets. Quadruplets are happening now. As people are waiting longer to have children, they're coming up with new ways to help them conceive. Where does that play? Let's say you have a family that is triplets. Where do you think that plays into birth order?
First of all, the triplets as a group take a lot of the family resources, especially if there's other older children. But all of the triplets will get birth orders based on who they say is the oldest, the next one, and the next one. They will get their number of birth. It doesn't make any difference if it's right or not, because it's a psychological thing. When you tell them, you're the oldest triplet, you're the middle triplet, you're the youngest triplet. So they will all get numbers, and then they'll start to respond personality-wise based on those numbers, even though they might be identical triplets.
I do think about I have some nephews and nieces that are triplets, and now that I think about it, the first question everybody teases them with is who's oldest, and they do know. You're kind of like, wow, you have an answer. Okay, so they do. You're right. They fit into that dynamic of who's oldest, who's middle, who's.
Based on development, we can tell, even if these kids were a minute or two apart, by the time they're teenagers, you can see the difference in which baby teeth are lost first or whatever. So you can tell who might be the oldest biological twin. But that doesn't mean anything because the parents tell them you're older or you're the youngest. But I had one set of twins that they were never told who's older. And I asked the parents, I said, well, why haven't you told them who's the older twin? They said, well, we didn't want any competition between the twins. These twins had their own language, which isn't uncommon, but they continued it as teenagers. They would come in and they would have different personalities on different days. And later on, as they grew up, they're under psychiatric care because they don't know who they are. They were never given an identity. They didn't know what number they were. And so they would vacillate between it, and they just couldn't get it right.
Wow. So knowing your place, your birth order is important.
From this whole birth order thing is, don't treat all your children alike. They're all unique with their own unique characteristics. So if you understand their birth order, you can play to that birth order and those characteristics that they have and make them feel special within the family. Don't make them all alike, because they're not.
I see. That's interesting. I mean, I think as every parent knows, it's like, oh, how do you try to be fair to all your kids? But really, what you're saying is there's no way to be fair, and that is part of their own.
Is it okay for me to tell my favorite that they're my favorite?
You might be older, but Mom loved me best. Remember that line you had?
Unfortunately, Smothers Brothers are way before us. I did read the book, and I did notice a lot of the references are pretty old. So I was going to tell you, I was like, you may need to update this book. I think it was written about 15 years ago, but some of those. I think you covered Marlon Brando, Richard Nixon. I was like, well, I do know of them.
Then you can actually get the real birth order numbers.
Gotcha. Something you just said brought to light of a current event. I mean, I know our president currently, Donald Trump, I think he's a 3, right?
He is a double birth order.
Oh.
He is a fourth born, but the first in actually the third family. So he's a 1-4. And the reason that he's the great negotiator and that people don't understand him is that the 4 is the baby. The baby tells anything that's on his mind right away. You hear it.
Oh, that's definitely that's him.
And then he's going to tell you what to do. So he has 2 distinct personalities, and he switches back and forth. And
so he has Tourette's and authoritarian disorder.
Understood that he was 2 different people, then he could use those independently. And that's why he drives the press crazy, and it drives the supporters crazy. They say, why are you acting this way? This is terrible. Don't do that. Or, the opposition just can't figure him out. But he's 2 different people. He's got a double birth order. His first 2 siblings were a 1 and a 2. Then there was a big gap, and his sister, the third, was a 3 only because there was a 4-year gap. And then there was another 4-year gap before he was born. So he became the 4 and a 1. And then his brother was born, who was a 5 and a 2. So he's a typical double birth order, 2 different personalities, or maybe more. And that's why he's so different.
I see.
Asking for accountability.
4 is the one who makes up nicknames for everybody, which he does.
Oh, he does make nicknames for everyone, right?
Funny guy. Okay. He really has great sense of humor. Well, that's the 4 side. But the 1 side, is very different than the 4, and they're very different sides. So he can swing back and forth. By the way, his vice president also has a double birth order.
He's got like triple names to go with his double birth order.
He's a very strong person, very strong. So, very different than Trump, but
you
got his own strengths.
You bring up an interesting point. I mean, we have leaders of the world, and you say a lot of them tend to be a number 1 just because leaders, like to lead and tell people what to do, right? And so we have this global dynamic where leaders are naturally number 1. They've always been, apparently, and they tend to be just because it's a fit. But we have countries now, as we mentioned before, that are tending to be full of lots of 1s. And we have a lot of geopolitical friction. And so what does this mean when you see where China is building up with, a lot of number 1s, and you see the US now going towards lots of number 1s, you see Europe going towards lots of number 1s, and then you see Africa having their birth rate is like 7. And so they have, lots of different dynamic. What does that mean, say, for 20, 30 years from now? Is that going to create nations that are constantly stubborn and wanting to push their own views upon the other group, or does this, mean that they're number 1, so they're also not the athletic one, they are not the savvy diplomat one, and so how do you think that'll play out as far as geopolitics and having a nation?
The birth order is apolitical. In other words, you could have a number 1 that's very conservative or a number 1 that's very liberal. That has nothing to do with their birth order, but it has to do with how they play out their convictions. A number 1 very liberal would play out very differently than a number 1 that's conservative. So just because you have more birth orders in a country than others, I don't think that's going to affect the geopolitical thing at all. It has to do with how the country is governed. And it does change based on the voters.
Very interesting. Yeah, it's a good question. Yeah. Which birth order tends to vote more?
We have to vote here. We don't get a choice.
You heard it here, folks. I had the opportunity to talk to Dr. Hurst. Dr. Hurst's book, Life's Fingerprint, and as it unlocks the secrets hidden inside the spacing between siblings, and discussion about the double Earth order. So really appreciate your time, Dr. Hurst. Glad we could figure out all of our technology. We had to come in with phone and part of this in video, but I think we figured it out. So really appreciate you giving your time today.
You did great. And they can find the book at mybirthorder.com. It's easy to remember.
mybirthorder.com.